Good afternoon. So in the summer of 1993, I was sitting at my desk in the Legislative Office building here in Albany, New York, working for the New York State Senate, and I got a call out of the blue asking if I would be interested in going to the Republic of Congo to be an election observer. I'd never been to the Republic of Congo. I'd lived in North Africa for a while, but that's a long ways from Congo. And I'd never been an election observer. But I was interested in this, not just because it was something wildly different, but I was interested in it also because it was a time when this history was unfolding, when the Cold War had ended, when elections seemed to be and democracy was breaking out all over, at least so it seemed. That as the scholar Francis Fukuyama said, it was the end of history. It was the triumph of liberal democracy at the end of this long twilight struggle of the Cold War. And so there were elections happening all over the place, and there were election observers going all over the place to make sure that these elections were somehow free and fair. And so now I had an opportunity to do this. So I went to talk to my boss, the senator, and asked him for some time off. He was very supportive. He also noted that it was probably the most unusual request for time off that he'd ever gotten, to go to Congo. And so I was on my way. The next day I was in Washington for briefings about our mission as election observers and the sorts of things that we are going to be doing, but the things that we shouldn't do, that we shouldn't meddle in the process. We shouldn't insert ourselves in Congolese politics. We were there to observe and observe only. That night, I was on a plane across the Atlantic, and after transfers and several stops and refuelings, finally landed in the capital of Brazzaville, where I spent a couple days with a whole team of observers being briefed on Congolese politics, on society, on security issues, and just getting to know each other. And I met the person that I would be working with over the next week or so, a Canadian judge from the province of Quebec who had done many observations already and was a great guide to this experience and really a great mentor for me on this first election observation that I was going to be part of. So we met with our driver, we headed off to the district that we were going to be observing in, and it was several hours of drive through the Congolese countryside, absolutely beautiful countryside, listening to great music on the radio, and traveling across the bumpiest possible roads you can imagine that had been washed out by rains, hadn't been properly kept up, and had been cratered by all the fighting that was going on in the country. And there was a lot of fighting going on in the country. So we got to the small town that was our base of operations. We toured around a little bit. We met with the local officials. We saw what was happening just in the immediate run-up to the elections. And the night before Election Day, we decided that we'd have a good meal, a few Congolese beers, which were fantastic. Ngak beer, highly recommended if you're ever in Brazzaville or anywhere nearby. And that we would turn in early. The electricity in this town went off at 9 o'clock every night, so we thought, well, that's a good time for us to go to bed. I didn't sleep very well that night because I was really nervous about the next day. There was a lot of things that we had to do, and I just wanted to get it right. I mean, the stakes are high. This is somebody's first elections in their country, and I'm there as an observer. I want to get it right. I also didn't sleep very well because when I did finally fall asleep, I woke up a little while later with some sort of a weight pressing down on my chest. Not a huge weight, but enough of a weight. And in my sleepiness, I sort of brushed whatever it was, and I realized that I had a noteworthy number of very large, very fuzzy spiders all over me. That was my reaction too. And in fact, I would say, you know, they hadn't briefed me on this particular eventuality. But in technical terms, I did what I would call, I freaked out. The lights are off, there's no electricity. I hadn't left my little gas lantern near enough to me. Who knows where the matches were. But you know, when you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's nobody there to help you and you're freaking out, you realize you have to stop freaking out. You have to figure out what to do. I found the gas lantern, I found the matches, I got rid of the spiders and found a way to get a little bit more sleep. The next morning we were up early. We wanted to get to the first polling station before it opened up, and the first polling station was far away. And so we had to go to a town on the shores of the Congo River because the first polling station was on an island in the Congo River. And so we got to this town, and the first person we met with was the chief of the village. Probably the most noteworthy thing about this photo is how much hair I have in 1993. So you can see the democracy business has been tough on my hairline, if nothing else. That's really my whole message of this talk. But it took us a long time to get there. We started late, we arrived late, the roads were terrible, and I was really eager to get going, to get moving. And we had a lot to do on this very long day ahead of us, this important day for us and for the nation of Congo. The judge who I was with saw my kind of agitation and eagerness and anxiety, and she took me aside and she said, we really need to spend some time with the chief of the village. These conversations are an important part of why we're here. They're part of the process. It's not just casting the ballots. It's not just checking the boxes on our reports. We need to talk with the chief, and we need to hear him out. And so we sat down, and she said this to me too. She said, we need to do this, and she said in French, she used the word doucement, slowly, gently, sweetly. And it's a great word because it encapsulates all of that. And so we did, and we sat down, we had tea, we talked about our respective countries, where we're from, our families, and eventually the chief introduced us to the guy who could rent us the boat. The boat, as it turns out, is a hollowed out tree trunk, in French, a pirogue. And this is the boat that we rented. And then we had to rent the motor for the boat, we had to rent the gas for the motor, and we had to hire the services of the guy who would operate the motor, and then a navigator. And then the last person whose services we secured, which was a guy with his own personal AK-47, who would be traveling up the river with us. And so we headed off up the river, and the judge at some point, and we're chatting amongst ourselves, and it's absolutely beautiful. The river is just enormous. The currents are very strong. And she says, well, maybe while we're going up the river, each of us should sing a song from our country. And so the Congolese guys each had really beautiful songs. The judge sang this absolutely beautiful song from her childhood in Quebec. And all the while I'm thinking, I've got nothing. Like I don't remember songs, I don't know. And so there in June, in the middle of the river in Congo, I belted out, Santa Claus is coming to town. And I have to say, I did it with feeling. I really think I nailed it. And I was feeling pretty good about myself and feeling like, just a few days ago I was in Albany and here I am, this is really cool. And then the motor conked out. And now we're drifting backwards. And not only back, but we're drifting toward the opposite shore, which is another country. It's the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zaire, known to some. And things over there are even in worse shape than they were in the Republic of Congo. And it wouldn't have been particularly good for any number of reasons if we were to end up over there. And so there was a lot of nervousness in the boat. There was a lot of frantic working on the motor. Didn't seem to be going anywhere, making it work. And then the word went out. Does anyone have a screwdriver? Now, this is an unusual question, but it just so happened I had my Swiss Army knife on me. I turned it over, they used it on the engine, voila. It worked, we headed on our way. We got to where, now we're really delayed. We get to the first polling station, which is in this island village. And guess what? They're not having the election. They're not holding it that day. We've spent hours getting there, and they're not having the election. So we decided that we should at least interview the people in charge and find out why they're not having the election. And so we sat down in what was like the equivalent of the town hall on this island village, a cinder block building. The whole town, all the residents crowded around, looking through the windows, looking through the doors. And the two guys who were in charge, the judge went into one corner with one guy and was chatting with him, and I went to the one corner with another guy and I was chatting with him. And in pretty short order, these two guys started accusing each other across the room of undermining the election. And then they started yelling at each other. And then they were up and out of their seats, and they were coming at each other, and they were grappling with each other, and then it was really a fist fight. A knockdown, drag-out fight was ensuing, And then all sorts of fights outside started to erupt. I thought, well, this is not exactly how I had planned this going. Our guys in the boat are some yards away over by the shore with the boat. All they know is there's this melee breaking out, and their charges, the judge and me, are in the middle of it. So this guy fires off a few shots into the air. Now, I don't know that it's into the air. Now I just know I hear machine gun fire on top of all of this. But he was firing in the air. Everyone came to a quick pause. And now I'm thinking, well, for any number of reasons, we need to get out of here. We're really late. We haven't seen an election yet. Everything has disintegrated. Things are falling apart here. We need to move on. And again, the judge very wisely said, let's finish our conversation with these two guys. Again, she said, do small. Let's proceed this way. And we had civil conversations with them, and they had a civil conversation with each other. We moved on. We saw lots of other votes being cast. It was a difficult election. It was a violent time in Congo. But in the midst of that violence, I saw so many people coming out and walking for miles in the hot sun and casting their ballots. In many cases, for the first time in their lives, that it mattered, that the election really mattered. And after that election, I worked in lots of other elections in Guinea-Conakry in West Africa. Again, you can see people turning out with babies on their backs, standing in long lines, putting up with very challenging bureaucratic obstacles. In 2000, I worked in the first elections in Kosovo after the war, a place that had been ravaged by crimes against humanity, where the people who were working for me, the Kosovars, were coming to work under death threat every day, were voting in the shadows of mass graves, and where the town that I worked in had very few buildings left. They had either been bombed by NATO or had been burned down by either side during the war. Later in Macedonia, you can see here that I've upgraded myself. I've got not only a tie, but also an armband. And the armband really makes it, I think. But it was an important time to be there in that country at that moment. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, a country that we know has suffered so much and has a very precarious political system, yet people turned out and were working very hard, as you can see at this polling station, in good cheer. And most recently, in Ukraine, in 2014. So following the uprisings in Ukraine, in the Maidan, in Kiev, the ouster of their president, then the elections for a new president. The politics were very intense. Russia had annexed Crimea. There was out-and-out combat going on in the southeastern part of the country. Men were being called to military service from across the country, and people were putting on this election. And I worked with some just extraordinary people, the international observers. It was a huge mission for the Organization and Security and Cooperation in Europe, which the US is a member state of, and the Ukrainians, who I worked with. Here is a picture of the people at the district office of the electoral district where I was working, and they worked over 24 hours straight to make sure that the votes were tallied and that the results were sent on to the Capitol. And they did this in the face of the whole election system, the electronic system, being hacked by a foreign power. We don't know what power exactly, or I don't know exactly. I would just say, sometimes you get the bear and sometimes the bear gets you. It was a very tough day. These people worked very hard. The day after the election, I sat down with some of the Ukrainian election workers and some of my fellow observers and had this extraordinary meal, this time to kind of just commune over great food, conversation, many toasts, a fair amount of homemade vodka, singing some songs. There was no singing of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I think that was a missed opportunity. And it was just an extraordinary moment. And having worked on all these elections, I think gives me some opportunity to stand back and reflect on democracy in general and democracy in my own country? What are some of the elements that matter? Now, I could talk to you about this like an academic, and there's reams of volumes of books written about what democracy is and what it isn't. But what I was able to experience through these elections in other people's countries was the lived experience of democracy, the human element of democracy. How does it transpire when people are really having to sacrifice such a great deal to go and vote, to hold an election, to vote for the very first time in their lives? And so I've been in many countries where people have cast their very first votes. And I am reminded of that when I vote here. And I'm there at the polling station, and I think there's somebody here who's voted for the first time, either because they've just turned 18 and they can vote, or because they've come here from another country and they're now a citizen. And maybe they've come from some place where they couldn't have voted before. I think about how important Election Day is as a ritual, as a time to gather together. At the polling stations, I've seen so many great moments and conversations in polling stations around the world. And it pains me sometimes when I go to vote here and it seems kind of pro forma, or it just seems empty. And I think about why people vote. People vote to send people to institutions that we hope will work, that we need to work, because otherwise it's an empty exercise. We need to be able to know that the day after Election Day isn't just winner take all, that we will be able to maintain something akin to a loyal opposition, meaning that you can assiduously oppose the policies of the government in power and still be loyal to the country, and still be deemed as such, not be seen as traitorous, that we can work toward compromise. It makes me think about leadership and the qualities of leadership. I've been in many countries that have had revolutions where people have said, we're looking for our Nelson Mandela. There's not a lot of Nelson Mandelas in history. A man of that character comes along every so once in a while. However, we do need to find ways to cultivate leadership. We shouldn't be too overly reliant on individual leaders, but at the same time, we should seek out leaders who have the courage of their convictions, but also the capacity to compromise. And in my experience, that's rare and it's fragile, but it's possible. And it is one of the differences that I think comes down between democracies working and not working. But in the end, I think it really comes down to the many other things that are not part of constitutions or institutions or electoral law. Alexis de Tocqueville came to the United States in the 1830s, and he wrote about democracy in America. And he noted that what really makes it work here are all those other things, the other ways that we come together, the other ways in which we find opportunities to work together and to converse with each other. And I think back to that tea that I had with the chief in Congo, and the judge saying to me, do small. We need to stop. We need to talk, and we need to listen. I think about the boat going up the Congo River against the currents and having to work together, singing songs together, but also, finding a way to fix that motor. I think about the two guys yelling at each other in the cinder block building. We need to have a civil conversation. Do small. We need to talk. And so there's a lot of things that are hard. They're so big, it's hard to imagine how we can fix them. But we can talk to each other. We can listen to each other. We can talk to somebody who we know we disagree with and who disagrees with us. And that, I think, is an important element that I've learned from traveling around the world and seeing people risk everything for democracy. And I leave you with one further and very important thought. Don't forget your Swiss Army knife.